All right. Thanks, John. Good to see everybody. I see a few names that I recognize from over the years. Good to see you still doing the fighting the good battle with Informix. I am still doing Informix work after lots and lots of years, and still having fun. That's the most amazing thing. I still am definitely having a lot of fun with the product and working with clients and that type of thing. So let's go and get started. Let's see. But yeah, the webcast is being recorded. Mute your line. You can put a question in the chat. John will be sending me the chat questions. And I'm one of those that doesn't mind questions during the presentation. It's good to be able to answer questions in the context of what we've just been talking about or what slide is on the screen. I will say, though, because we are limited on time, that some questions I might not be able to dive deep into just because it's going to take too long. But I do, like I say, I do prefer questions during the presentation. We'll stack them up if we have to, and I may have to defer one. And certainly we'll do any questions at the end of the presentation as well, too. So we're going to have the lines muted, and that's for obvious reasons, just to keep the noise down, etc. But let's move on. All right, who am I? There's all the stuff I've done. Big deal. I just wanted people that don't know me well to know that I've been around for a while. The one that I think is funny is the very top one, which you're thinking, what does that have to do with anything? I always knew I wanted to teach, and I was going to teach music, but then I ended up getting into computers. And so I, at my own little YMCA, which is about 7 miles down the road from here, we started a computer education center with TRS-80s. Those of you that are old enough remember the TRS-80s. So that was kind of fun. I was doing that while I was in college. And when I came out, I taught night classes, even when I was working during the day. So I always had that love of teaching and the love of technology. So you see things with EDS, GM, Ingress. That was my worst job ever. Unify, I can't remember what I did there. Then I hit my dream job. Went to Informix, started teaching, then doing consulting, and got drug into speaking all over the place. It was a blast, lots and lots and lots of travel. I was a lot younger, but it was just, it was an incredible job. IBM bought Informix around 2000, I think. I did some education, wrote some red books, or a red book, helped write a red book, and was on the worldwide Informix team. Lots of travel again, joined the worldwide team. And that, when they said worldwide, they really meant worldwide. So, yeah, it was definitely exhausting, but it was a lot of fun. Did some work at Xtivia, only Informix, and then I've been doing independent consulting since then, and a couple of other things. Contributed to Ron Flannery's book and a couple of odds and ends there. So, yeah, I've been just since 1995. I've only done Informix work. I was told that my future was in DB2, and I said no, it's not, and I'm still doing Informix work. So that's good. All right. Informix was my dream job, like I said. IBM, contrary to belief, I did enjoy working for IBM. It was a really cool tech, direct access to developers, and on the worldwide team, I should say, pretty cushy flights. The problem with that gig or that time of my life was an incredible amount of travel and just lots of chaos. Everything was such a blur. And I'll show you one of my calendar entries here in just a second. You'll understand what I'm talking about. Now, I'm doing consulting and pure DBA work. I've returned back to Indiana for the second time, for the last time. Little travel. I now have 10 grandkids. I love coaching youth basketball. I'm back into my music. And believe it or not, it's exciting to take your trash out more than 1 week in a row after you've traveled most of your adult career. So yeah, it's a very simple life. And to be honest with you, that was the goal in coming back, is settling down and not leaving the house as often as I used to. Some presentation tips. It's hard for me to cover one topic in 45 minutes, let alone all the ones that I've got in front. I'm going to cover what I can. If you see a mistake, say something, raise your hand, chat. I don't care. It doesn't matter. If I used to tell the students, if you knew everything, you couldn't afford me. So lots of really smart folks on the call. Jump in when you need to. And for those of you that might have questions, write this down, send an email to mark@markscranton.com, and I will do my best to respond. That little picture at the bottom was kind of fun. Grant Meineke was able to get those bats carved out with Informix, and you can see 1998 is the, I was part of the consulting group, but I actually was a trainer at that point. So it was a great gig, like I said. Memory lane. I had up one of the first sites, even before they called them blogs back in the day. I used to put tech tips and tricks, so whatever it might be. It was a lot of fun. I've taken my site down over the last few years just because it's just too much work to keep it up to date. So one of these days I may resurrect it, but who knows? But that was kind of fun. What else? When I joined the worldwide team, this was what we were slated to do in the world and in the USA. It was way too much travel. I was younger, like I said. I couldn't do it now. This is another way to look at this. This was 1 year of my calendar I happened to pull up the other day. And you can see lots of US things, lots of out of town things, lots of out of country things. And I say it was exciting. It was fun. I got to see the world, but it was just such a blur. It was really tough. So I don't miss the travel for sure. And no good Informix presentation starts without a picture of the car that a lot of you remember. We sponsored, probably, it looks like an F1 car. It's probably an F3 or F2, but we sponsored a car back in the day when our logo was way to web. So it's been a while, but that's kind of a fun memory. Okay, here's everything I hope to cover. Of course, I'm not going to cover all of these. There's some fun stuff, some technical tips and tricks, some stories around what I found out with what clients did or what I came across or helped troubleshoot, whatever. And then there's a few quickies that are mostly technical, deep technical dives. And I shouldn't say deep, I should say a slide or two. So anyway, let's just jump right in with a fun story. So they say, whoever they are, if you're a boss or manager, you should be training someone to take your place if you want to move up. That's what I've always heard. I never wanted to be a boss or manager, but that's what they say. Ironically, look what I found. I found the evaluation that Scott Pickett did on me in '98 when he was taking our sysadmin class. I'm pretty sure this was the IDS sysadmin class. Isn't that crazy that Scott took the class? I was teaching it, and so he was supposed to replace me. He didn't only replace me. When I left, he replaced me. So not only doesn't always work out the way we think it will, but no, Scott and I still joke about that I actually was one of his first instructors, and now he's still traveling the world doing his thing. So good for him. I hope he's well. All right, let me go back to the topic list. I'm going to kind of jump back and forth. What I want to do is dive into a fun story from back in the day that I entitled "We Need More Funnels." This is a true story,
by the way.
Go ahead.
Scott is here, by the way.
Scott, good. I wonder if he saw. Well, just in case, maybe he didn't see his thing. Scott, just in case you didn't, you're an important person. There you are. So if you came in late, there you are. Anyway, yeah, I keep everything. I found evaluations and that emails that they're just too funny. I still have all that stuff. All right. So this one here is a fun story. This is a true story of a client that I was consulting with. Around 2007, that's important. They specialize in tax software. I'd been in there for a while, for a little over a year, and me and another consultant were concerned about the layout of the DB spaces, primarily one. So what did they have? They had a bunch of DB spaces here, a bunch of DB spaces here, and guess what they had? One simple blob space. Those of you that have been around a while, those are the not smart blob spaces, but just the simple old-fashioned blobs. So at a certain time of year, thousands of users would e-send their tax returns into them. The first stop was Informix. The subsequent stops were Oracle. But the copies of the tax returns would get dropped into this simple blob space. Those of you that have been doing things for a while probably know where I'm going with this. The way I was able to prove it is kind of fun, so let me show you. Okay, what do you notice? You notice there's a single blob space. Single, simple blob space as well. Okay, essentially on a Monday that year, the engine essentially stopped. It wasn't really stopped, just significantly congested. It just didn't work. I was actually on vacation in South Padre, got the call on Friday. I left my van, and back in the day, I was windsurfing all the time. I left that in Texas and flew to the client, spent 2 weeks trying to recreate the issue. Fortunately, vacation was nearly over, family left, etc. I asked them, I said, did you push it until it broke? And they said, no, we didn't. This client had lots and lots of systems. They had a perf system, a test system, a duration system. They had all this redundant hardware. And I was hoping they would have pushed it till it broke, so they would know what the threshold was. Well, they didn't do that, so it broke. So I started trying to recreate it. Fortunately, we had another guy there from a different company that was able to grab disk mirrors, throw them back in place so we could do cycles or repeated test over and over and over against the same disk for consistent testing. The watcher, which I didn't take time to get into this presentation, would have taken a long time. I gathered tons of watcher data. The watcher is scripts I started way back in the day on my first assignment that just keeps gathering lots and lots of information about the engine, about the box, about all kinds of things. So I was able to use the watcher data to start to dig in. What was the initial somewhat obvious issue? Of course, a single DB space that is getting lots of stuff, and it happened to be a single old-fashioned blob space. So didn't have the metadata that would help it be managed, et cetera, et cetera. Those of you that have worked with blobs know that the smart way for blob spaces is using smart blob spaces or something like that, we used to say. All right, two of us, me and another consultant, had warned them. Clearly, a single blob space was the issue. Everyone was waiting on everyone. So in other words, the reason I use the word funnels, because what? They had a single funnel, a single pipe, a single path going down into that DB space, and they're just backing up, waiting for their turn. So we knew what it was, but I wanted to prove it, and I think we needed to prove it so we could have them make the changes. We had been encouraging changes for a long time, and the fact that they were unwilling to make them made me believe that if I didn't prove it, that they may not still be willing to make the change, and life goes on and it'll happen again next year. So what was being waited on? Clearly access to the blob space. Let's prove it, not just theoretically. What did I use? I actually had stumbled across OnStat Big X, not little x, but Big X. And you guys are saying, what OnStat what? What's Big X? I don't know that too many people have used Big X. It's not complicated necessarily, but it just never seemed to be in the mix of some of the explanations, some of the top 10 paper or top 10 OnStats we used to publish, etc. So what did I do? How did that help me? So OnStat Big X gives you precise information about the threads that are waiting on buffers. Little b big B has similar info, but I got stuck on the OnStat -X. I remember talking to tech support and told them I was using this, and whoever it was said, we've never thought about using that. So I felt kind of cool at that point, but nonetheless, let's look at the different pieces and parts. This is the user session. You can find session spelled wrong. That's an Indiana spelling of session. OnStat -U will give you who it is, the session information. You can drill down if you need to. Not so much what I'm after, though. The buffer status, XLock, not as important as this little guy. This piece right here, I found to be probably the most important. It gives you the physical chunk and the page offset into that chunk. Those of you that have been around a while, you can use onCheck P, upper or lowercase p, to go look at those pages if you need to. There's also sysmaster tables that will tell you what the page types were, etc. There's a number of different ways to slice and dice this. But that was the piece that I was most interested in. Somebody's waiting on that buffer. And the thing is, I'm sorry, what type of, is it a B-tree page or B-tree data page, bitmap page, whatever it might be. So these flags here would tell me that as well pretty quickly. So the two of those combined was very helpful. And then that's the list of waiters. It wasn't so important that I go look at all of those sessions. Those are clearly sessions you can glean from OnStat -U. But really, what was really important was what types of pages were being waited on and how many. So I went ahead and started gathering that. I put some scripts together. This output right here, by the way, this is not the part of the OnStat -X, as you probably know. This is a massaged output. And you can see they're jagged rows. So these pages here, that one, and I'm sorry, these users here are all waiting on that page. That one user there is waiting on that page. So you would see disparate lengths of jagged rows, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. And in the case of this client, these lists were very, very long. That's why I had to script around it and go from there. And that's why I added timestamps to it as well as we were going through. All right. Now, just on the what they are, I think I've already said. The owner, the page numbers, the page flags, and the list. So that helped me understand what the weight was, and I was able to tell them that in fact everybody's waiting on these DB spaces. This output here is not the one from the client. This is from something else. But I looked at the physical page number, found out which DB spaces they fell in, and the page type. As it turns out, they weren't waiting on pages in the DB space. They were waiting on one of thousands of bitmap pages for that DB space. So they literally were waiting to find a home to go to through a bitmap page. And the bitmap pages, by the way, just in general, that literally is the mapping for where free pages are or free pages are not, or the page types within a chunk in a DB space. They literally were waiting to get access to the bitmap page so we could scan the bitmap page or scan whichever bitmap page. We would keep scanning bitmap pages and get down to a free page. Then we could find a home for what they wanted to drop in. So it was pretty bad when they're all lined up, just trying to find where they're supposed to go as opposed to where they did need to go. So back then I was digging in pretty deep. I was teaching the internals class a lot. And that's why I think I got really deep into a lot of the different things you see here. Whereas Lester probably could have done this with one SQL against this master. Maybe not. I don't know. But there are SQL ways to do these things with SysMaster or some of the other databases that we have built in. I've more than once been accused of diving too deep too quick, and couldn't you have just done this? And I said, oh yeah, probably so. But anyway, that is the story about this client back in the day. It did have a serious impact on all the people trying to send their tax returns. The client ended up paying fines and this, that, and the other. But the thing is that this illustrates for me more than anything, and one thing that I forgot to put into this presentation is I've got a section that talks about what do I see when it comes to clients, what do I see as very common, as very problematic, etc. In a sentence, I could say clients are tall, their DB spaces, their disk layouts are tall and thin versus short and wide. And what does that mean? Well, tall and thin, I've seen clients, and I've got one right now that only has a handful of DB spaces, and everything is shoved into those DB spaces with lots and lots and lots of chunks, versus turning that to be short and wide and having lots of DB spaces where you can take advantage of what? Parallelism. In most cases, what's our old school rule? One scan thread per DB space. Not always the case with everything, but that is the general rule for a lot of things. And so the client I have right now, they're growing pretty big. They're still not huge, but they're big enough to really, really need to start spreading things out, spreading things thin. And disk is so much cheaper nowadays than it used to be. The opportunity to do that is, I think, is much easier. And you've got boxes with a lot more horsepower, with a lot more CPU, so you can take much, much more advantage of the parallelism that is inherent and has been inherent within the engine since the mid 90s. So I'm gonna turn the chat back on, John. Let me know if anybody's curious about anything. All right, let me go back to the table of contents. Let's see. Let's do this one next. This is a fun one. Back in the day when I used to teach only, one of the things that would always be tough for us to teach a class was somebody that didn't have the prerequisites. As trainers, we were always worried about them coming without prerequisites, especially if they didn't know VI. Now, it's funny because it didn't make me angry. It didn't bother me. It made me feel bad for them because, as you can imagine, in a sysadmin class or a M&O class, managing and optimizing class, they're going to use VI a lot. And so if they came to class without knowing VI, they were really, really at a disadvantage. And we would also pair people up in groups of two. And then I always felt bad for the person they end up being paired with because he would have to help them come along with VI. But you didn't really have any choice. You had to try to pair somebody up that didn't know VI with somebody that was a little quicker and at least a little more patient. So we always worried about that. Once upon a time, there was a class on a very cold day in Denver winter. During introductions on day one, a student said, "My dog is in the truck. Could I bring him in?" You can imagine the not so gentle things I wanted to say, but of course, but I thought about it for a minute and I said, "Sure, bring him on in. Does he know VI?" Everybody laughed. He didn't laugh. Everybody else laughed. And actually, the people that don't know VI didn't laugh because they don't understand the silliness of what I said. But that's one of my favorite fun stories and I love the graphic about the dog at the computer. So we used to bump into that quite a bit. All right, let's see. Here's one of my handy script I put together probably a year ago to watch the progress of a restore. One of my sites, we do restores. There was a period we were doing restores every weekend. And we were and are still using TSM. And the initial configuration of TSM was problematic, let's say. But I wanted to watch the restore. I got an alert at the end of the restore when it was done, but I wanted to watch a little closer. So I had some fun measuring the transfer rates to troubleshoot issues with the switch or the pipe or the bandwidth. You can see how much time is left, how many DB spaces are left, how many logical logs are remaining, etc. What else? This used to happen at our site more often than it does now. The storage manager would get stalled, and it simply was a configuration thing where we had too much going on with the storage manager, or we had kicked off way too many threads for the number of devices on the back end. So being able to see that stalled message was good. And a lot of these things, by the way, you'll see in these handy scripts that I put together, they are in alerts and in pages and that type of thing as well. Might be, and any kind of problems that happen. In this case, one of the on-bar processes.
We lost sound for about 15 seconds there, Mark. You might want to go back about a paragraph. You're back now.
I'm back now. All right. So did we cover this, John?
Yeah, I'd say go to the start of the next one.
Mark.
Yep. There we go.
I'd start there.
Okay. So this is an output to see a number of things going on during the restore. Tells you how many DB spaces are left, any errors. This type of thing was handy to know, but since I had bar retry set to, I think, 10 in most cases, this is good to know, but not problematic necessarily. It's going to retry the DB space that it failed on, in my case, up to 10 times. If it fails, it keeps failing, then you know what happens. So this tells you which DB spaces are being written to. And this is the OnStat Big D, by the way. This is, if I remember right, this is reads and writes. The Big D doesn't get used as much as little d, but it definitely I think is very valuable. Now, the Big D is only effective if you're really doing the OnStat minus Z. Let me explain that. I wanted to see the amount of activity since 60 seconds ago. So I was OnStat minus Zing every time through this script. It's something you don't want to do in a live system, obviously. I could, when I watch an archive, I could see the rate of the archive going out, but with an OnStat minus Z going every cycle, but I wouldn't want to do that. There's too much other information that I don't want to lose. In this case, we're doing a restore, so we don't care if the profilers get zeroed. This is the part that is the most handiest, for lack of better Indiana grammar. pages per minute, pages per hour, blah, blah, blah. So these different cycles, every 60 seconds or so, I'm getting 623 million pages per hour. I'm getting 675, 669, etc. This just stacks up. I've cut this, edited this output, obviously. This just stacks up, and that way I can tell if the rate is going to be good enough to be able to restore in a reasonable amount of time. When we first started using TSM at this client, I was lucky to get 90 million pages per hour. And so you can imagine the restore for one of the engines took about 8 hours, and we were okay. We're just restoring from prod into a test box. We had some time. It was okay. But when I saw this jump up, I heard rumor that we ended up with a new switch. And when I saw this jump up, well, of course, we're getting a lot better rates. On bigger boxes than this, I'm getting 900 million pages per hour. And that helps when you have a multiple terabyte engine. How many DB spaces are left? And I used to have a section where how many logical logs are left, and I took it out because there's a bug somewhere. But anyway, this is kind of fun. And this is working a lot, as you might imagine, on the bar act log. One thing about this client that I've been at for quite a while, when I jumped in, I could explain odds and ends about on bar, but when it but to the level of detail I can now, it's quite different. So looking at the bar act, there's a lot of information in there, and I'm constantly looking at the bar act logs, and there is summary information at the end that is handy as well, et cetera, et cetera. So all right, I think that might be it on this slide. Yep. Okay. Let's go back and let's see. Let's do a fun story. Many of you remember that we used to do conferences in Vegas. We did it at the Hilton. We did it a number of places. Well, one of the many user conferences I was at when I was young, I was scheduled to give 7 presentations. I'm thinking, what genius would agree to do 7 presentations? I'm thinking, somebody with an ego, and that was me. But I had a lot of presentations. My hotel had what looked to be a fabulous buffet with my favorite road food, which happened to be steak. When I would travel, I would always get myself one good steak. But I said, wow, they've got a buffet and it has lots of steak on it. But then a good friend of mine once said, stay far, far away from buffets found in Sin City, Grasshopper. Yeah, I literally was told to stay away, but I saw lots and lots of steak. What happened? I ended up with 3 days of food poisoning. It was awful. And I still gave my presentations, but I went to the presentation and literally leaned up against the back chalkboard, whiteboard, whatever it was, and told people, this is not going to be one of my standard presentations. I'm really sick. I'm going to do the slides, maybe answer a couple of questions, go back to bed. Ironically, when I came out of that food poisoning situation, I had a tooth that was just killing me, you can imagine. And as soon as I got back to Denver, it got pulled. So yeah, that was an interesting year in Vegas. So, but yeah, stay away from buffets in Vegas. Probably good advice. Okay. I'm just picking around or just jumping around, picking topics seem interesting. This is a topic I think would be good for an additional talk later on with it being a great deal of the presentation. Storage provisioning is a feature that I've definitely enjoyed. There's a couple things I'd like to see done differently, but I still think overall it's been nice. For those of you that don't use storage provisioning, you literally allocate chunks add chunks to the storage pool. Chunks with all the things you can imagine, the path, the offset, the size, blah, 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 the stuff we're used to. Each engine only has a single storage pool. I don't know if that gets changed. I'd love to see that change so we can have different storage pools for different parts of an engine, different whatevers. But for now, each engine has a single storage pool. And I look at this quite often. If you look at the bottom one first, my alias, SP info, that's not an Informix alias, that's mine, kicks up a script that goes ahead and shows you what's in the storage pool. And then the top one goes ahead and tells you what is still free. So it's nice because the free will say this is what is available, this is what's been allocated, where it's been allocated, etc. So it's nice to have that. What I have online, there's actually an alert that will allow you to not a task that will allow you to look for low storage. I kicked off the task and I found that it wouldn't keep up. It didn't seem to work fast enough. So I went ahead and created a small script, a small monitor that would run every minute or two, whatever, and see if I'm within 0.25 gig of a DB space being full or whatever it might be. I can't remember the details. That would actually go ahead and allocate the chunk from the storage pool to that DB space. I wanted to take it one step further and give names that were a lot more meaningful to the DB space where it was headed, but I didn't. So the downside is that you end up with lots of chunks in different DB spaces called storage pool 1, 2, 3, whatever it might be. So it doesn't really glean the name of the DB space or the table that you're using it for, etc. So it's a little more generic than I like, but that's something somebody easily could do. Is that same script that does the allocation, you could actually name it something that is much more meaningful. All right,
Mark, if you use file systems instead of files or raw devices, it names the chunks after the DB spaces.
Oh, good to know. So you pointed to a directory or a file system?
Yep.
Oh, see, this is why I wanted your mic open, Art, because I figured
you asked for it.
I know I did, and everybody that's on the call, I said, can we leave Art and we should open Ben's too, by the way, Ben Thompson. But I said, is there a few guys we could leave their mic open because I'd love to have their input. So, no, that's actually really cool, Art, because it'd be fun to write the script that I talked about, but it'd be so much easier to point it to you just pointed to a directory, right? Well, you can't. You have to point it to a file system.
Well, file system or directory in a file system.
Yeah, I'm mixing and matching semantics there. So sorry.
Yep.
No, definitely good to know. If you guys, if you're on the call and you haven't played with storage provisioning, it's a little tricky, I think, and there's some concepts that are kind of odd, but I think it's a great utility, and yeah, so keep that in mind. Here's another fun story. I called it arachnophobia. Client reports this is a true story. It was down in Arizona. Client reports lots of slowness very randomly every day, no set duration, frequency otherwise. The IBM AIX dude came in and sat opposite me as we dug in. So he was at one corner of the table and I was at the other. Of what doesn't matter. And we would make a change. I'd make a change, say, do you notice anything? He'd make a change, do you notice anything? We were just doing stuff in real time. And I'd see, I saw this. What did you see? And it just went back and forth for a couple of days. We were a little frustrated, but it's okay. We kept at it. I started massaging the data, looking for patterns. I sorted the data. I added up columns. You're thinking, no, that was just silly. I threw that in. Looking for identifiers that might mean something, job names, usernames, whatever it might be. Who knows? I put air in my car tires and I stood on my head. Yeah, I was throwing darts. After 2 days, we were just really kind of at a loss. And it was in the summer in Arizona, so you can figure out the bad part about that. But I just wasn't sure. But something finally stuck. So I was doing some really ridiculous things, trying to see if I could catch any patterns or whatever. What do you notice? Again, I've already gone 40 minutes. What do you notice? You notice big session IDs that are growing, bigger, whatever it might be. And you're going to have some lower Informix session IDs because they started the engine, been out there forever. They're CPU VPs or any kind of VP for that matter. I happen to notice, I happen to notice one right here. And I made this up. This is not the exact screenshot. But there was a very low session ID. It was a username, which I didn't recognize, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short is we dug into that session while we had it. And I turned on the watcher to capture it and then also captured it while it was still live. As it turned out, it was a web crawler. That's where the spider reference comes from. It was a web crawler that was crawling their stuff and mining data. You've seen those sites that will sell you data about where did somebody live, how many times are they arrested, how many dogs do they have. It's for mining data and selling it back. Once we found that and killed it and dealt with it, performance came back, and that was it. So that was kind of an interesting thing. It's one of those where if I'm stuck, I will start looking at data 3 times sideways and just hopefully something turns up. All right, let's see. Let's do this one next so I don't forget it. Top faux pas, the top things I've seen, at least in my travels. And this is where if anybody wants to share, it's fine as well. The one I seem to see the most is you paid for it, you need to use it. In other words, they bought a big box, but they're not using it. This should be fun. You could be buying a 10 megabyte computer system for only $59.95 for 15. Oh, that's what I just said. 10 megabyte hard disk, blah, blah, 8-bit microprocessor. Yeah. When we were doing our classes at Informix, this is the kind of stuff we use. That's why we couldn't do PDQ and some of these other things. But I thought this was fun. I found this the other day somewhere. And anyway, so what I'm seeing is I've got a client that has a big box, 65 gig of memory, 32 logical CPUs, terabytes and terabytes of disk, whatever. So they've got this big piece of hardware. They've got this engine that uses lots of disk, but guess what? Doesn't really take advantage of the memory availability and don't have a lot of CPU VPs sitting out there, or VPs of whatever sort they need. And I've seen this more often than not. And I remember one client in Atlanta I went down to, they're having such performance with reports and this, that, and the other. I literally just increased the shared memory, the ShemVirt, the virtual portion of memory for their utilization of PDQ, and it was amazing how much faster things ran. I've also seen sites where the buffer cache is just way too small. That's one of the easiest things to measure. And you double, triple, quadruple the buffer cache. Can you go too far? Of course. But just making things bigger when you've got that hardware available. If your box is not just for the database, for the engine, I should say, then you have to be a little more careful. But I've seen more often than not lately that people have boxes that are just meant to be database servers, or they're even virtual boxes, and their resources are meant just for the Informix engine. So go ahead and utilize it. Take advantage of it. You all remember the N-1 rule. N-1, how many CPU VPs do you want? N-1, that's so old school. It's been old school for 20 years probably. One of the sites I work on most of the time, I've got well over 100 CPU VPs, and I've got, I think, 32 logical CPUs. And that's another easy one to measure. When you see, you can look at your box and see, do I have headroom to add CPU VPs? If so, have at it. You can add and drop CPU VPs on the fly. So I just see them. I don't know that anybody's quoted the N-1 rule to me, but when I used to travel a lot, everybody used to bring that up. And I said, we're reaching a point where we're outrunning that. And not using enough virtual in conjunction with PDQ. We had PDQ back in the early 90s, and it was so powerful, but the boxes just weren't powerful enough to be able to handle a lot of it. Clients that really needed to leverage that type of thing went to XPS, but that's a whole nother story altogether. So if you pay for the box, use it. If you pay for 65 gig, don't use 3 gig. I see it a lot more than you might think. Not using PDQ. This could be a whole nother 2-hour topic. A lot of people tiptoed into PDQ maybe because they hadn't had a chance to really experiment with it, and they ended up with a bad experience. They compiled their store procedures with PDQ priority. This is also known as a resume updating event. They might have never had a box with enough horses to play with until now. They never had a version that allowed it. I've got a client on Workgroup that needs to get off of Workgroup so they can use PDQ. When they do, they'll have no idea what to do PDQ-wise until I sit down and help explain that. There's also a lot of times I found a general misunderstanding of how to use it. We did not explain it well back in the 90s and 2000s. It really wasn't, and that was my group. We usually had classes of 16, 8 engines on each box, 256 meg of mem, and that is not a misprint. And a hamster was pretty much powering it on a wheel. There was too much info for a 5-day class. We had to skip some chapters. The clients weren't using it for the same reasons, okay, because they didn't have enough hardware. And any of the clients that really needed big horsepower, Wachovia and some of the other clients, they used XPS. So PDQ is so much better than, I shouldn't say better. There's so many more options. There's implicit PDQ. There's lots and lots and lots of reasons to use it. One of my clients right now is really, really scared to use it because they had a bad experience with it. And the other thing that I might mention if I can remember, actually it's on one of the slides coming up. So not using PDQ is definitely, in a lot of cases, something you're just robbing yourself. And if you're on work group, keep in mind you can't use PDQ. But nonetheless, if you have the option to use it, use it. External tables was brought over from XPS. What a powerful and simple implementation. I know there's quite a few people on the call that have done talks or papers on external tables. It's absurdly easy to implement. If you're doing pipe to pipe, it's a little trickier, but it's not ridiculous. You can outrun your box if you crank up PDQ with external tables and have lots of data files for I/O. But external tables, I've got a canned script that I run. If I want to unload a table, I use it just and let it do all the creation of the external files, the data files, whatever it might be. It's all configurable. It's all parameter driven, etc. So I strongly encourage all of you to use external tables and dig in. But be careful with it. Make sure you understand how powerful it is, because many times when I show people how quickly I can do things with external tables and PDQ and whatever, they say, well, that can't be right. And it really is. So it's so fast. Too many duplicate indexes. This is one thing I'd love to be able to talk a long time about, but I won't. A duplicate index looks similar to this. You've got the key value, row ID, delete flag, row ID, delete flag, row ID, delete flag, for however long it goes. For as many data rows that are needed to be pointed by this key value. This can span many nodes or many pages of the B tree if there's lots of duplicates. This will, in most cases, increase the levels of the B tree. Just like index values, row IDs are sorted, and we try to maintain the order. We have to do maintenance on that little guy pretty much real time. So the maintenance can be very, very expensive when we delete a single data row. We need to go get rid of that. Need to go get rid of that row ID. What we actually do is we flip the delete flag, and then we go back and clean it up at some point. That's why one of the reasons we added the delete flag after version 5. And if you've got this and lots of rows, the row IDs are spanning multiple nodes. It does increase the pressure on the root node of the tree. Big trees in general are known to have lots of pressure on the root node of a tree. So performance can be difficult. Okay, how do we fix it? Use less dupe indexes. I like this. Not always good, but normal form helps this issue. Yes, third normal form isn't always the best. Back from our days of ERD. Another column to reduce the resulting composite key to give more uniqueness. Resulting composite key has more uniqueness. I'm missing a word there. This helps reduce the long list of row IDs that span the nodes, increasing levels, etc. Had a client whose month-end processing was really, really bad, couldn't find a pure unique index. And so I essentially did the same thing as I did before. I said, look, everybody's waiting on these index DB spaces. I didn't dive in with the OnStat Big X. I didn't need to prove it. I knew what was wrong. So we added another column to the composite index, give it a little more uniqueness. And this would definitely improve the month-end times significantly. I can't remember when Forest of Trees came out. I'm going to say 12, but I may be wrong. There is a Forest of Trees approach to B trees, which essentially splits up the B trees into multiple B trees. Big advantages. If it says for all the obvious advantages, it really gives you a lot more B trees, and so you've got less pressure on the root node or the early levels of a single B tree. So, and again, this is also achieved if you're fragmenting your indexes, you get multiple B trees, etc. I haven't tested and measured Forest of Trees in great detail, but I think it was a great idea. If anybody has any agree or disagree, then feel free to jump in. All right. We're going to go past 45 minutes. By the way, John said I can keep going. If you need to drop, feel free. I understand. Let's see. One of the little scripts that I play with or that I run all the time is looking at the engine maxes. We all know that there's max pages, max size, max number of rows for a given table space. If you have 3 fragments, you essentially have 3 table spaces. So in one of my clients, we have a situation where we're at that point. Now we have more DB spaces that have been added. Long story there. But we're at 97% of total pages. Total size is okay. Number of rows is fine. But this is a 2.5 billion row table, and this is the one that is concerning. The good news is it's not growing very fast at all for a couple different reasons. But I watch this every once in a while, and I get an alert on this when I know I'm approaching that max. If you hit that max, if you hit a max with one of these parameters, you're going to essentially be dead in the water and doing something until you can free something up. In this case, if we just adding a fragment to it, since it was round robin, believe it or not, would have allowed us to continue on. But in some cases, it will just stop you dead in the water. Let's see. Oh, this is a fun one. Teaching IDS sysadmin in Chicago to a large client in December. That's important that December. I said to them, how many of you are DBAs? Nobody raised their hand. How many of you are developers? Nobody raised their hand. How many of you know how to bowl? Everybody raised their hand. I said, so let's go bowling. Seriously, why are you all here? We get so many training credits a year and we don't want to lose them. I jumped out the window. Yeah, it's a situation where I had a class full of people that were not going to be DBAs, were not going to be developers, but they heard there was an Informix class down the hall. And let's just jump in because we can get our training credits. So I thought that was kind of fun. Let's see. I'll get through more of this than I thought. Go ahead.
Scott threw in the fact that those maxes that you referred to earlier are being increased in vNext. Oh,
excellent. Thank you, Scott. So that's very good. I think I remember reading something about that. So yeah, so again, the 3 maxes are going to be increased. And usually when we do increases on things like that, they're significant. So yeah, that's a good thing. One thing I've been running forever is what I call the sanity check. It's a canned investigator that does all this stuff. Certain things that pop up are very handy. A lot of this I have in standard alerts. I've moved a lot of the sanity check scripts to my alerts, so I don't have to run the report to find this out. But this is a great way to, if I have a brand new client, I'll go ahead and throw the sanity check, run it once, turn on the watcher, gather some data, put the 2 together. And some of the sections that are interesting, I'll just show you a few. Obviously, even though we have non-blocking checkpoints, some things still do block. And, I sound like I just contradict myself. Not really. But I remember when fuzzies came out and then fuzzies went away, and then we architected non-blocking, but there's still certain operations that will do blocking. So I put together a quick script to let me know how things are going. Average checkpoint over 2 seconds. Back in the day, 6 seconds was a long time. Not so much anymore, depending on whether there's blocking or not. Transactions blocked, 2.2. You can see the different things here. I'm not going to spend too much time on them. I've got a 1 duration of 180 seconds. Who knows what was going on there? That was the day after Christmas. So anyway, but this just gives me a quick summary of what's happening. What's this? This is the extent. This is some examples. I was supposed to say extents. Extents are still an issue. It probably always will be, not nearly as much as it used to be for a number of reasons. There were some point releases where we just really kept taking away the concern of just too many extents, and I can go into it, but I won't. This is something I used to run back in the day a lot to find the extents ratio. How many structures have 10 or more? That 10 should be changed to about 30 or 40, maybe, who knows. And there's the 10 again. I just have a list of the database, the partition, and the extents, number of rows, et cetera, et cetera. Any of these listings here that have 0 rows, clearly, and it is possible. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you guys have seen that, where you end up with a table that has a bazillion extents, but you've deleted all the rows, so that's 0 rows. In my case, those are indexes. So that's handy to be able to keep an eye on that. That was much more valuable back in the day, but it's still something that I think is important. I tend to look at the on stat minus GSPI. That's what that's supposed to say. Looking at long spins. Every once in a while, you'll see a partition number here on the right. And there's 3 or 4 different sections that I define this. This happens to be by the average number of loops per weight. And I can look at those partitions. And if one is popping up all the time, then I typically have IO or performance issues with that partition, whether it be an index or a table. And sequential scans are always fun. One of my sites that we still, anytime we have performance issues, it's very much always a sequential scan, and you know what's coming next. If it's a sequential, if all of a sudden we have sequential scans for this given table, usually an index has gone out to lunch, or a developer has made some changes and asked the DBA to get rid of an index, and blah 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 blah. So, still watch sequential scans. Still is impacting in some environments. This is one that's interesting. Mr. Watson is the database name. I thought that would at least wake him up, although he's gone, isn't he? I still bump into clients that when I do the sanity check that end up having a lot of page level locking data or tables. And they don't even know it. And we know the downside of page level locks for OLTP or very volatile environments. So I usually run a quick script to give me a list of the databases that are tables that have page level locking, and then it's a simple change. So, and another one, if you're ever curious how many of your tables are compressed and don't have a hard list, you can go look at the compression dictionaries through one of the on stats, and it'll give you this long list of some of the compressions, some of the tables that are compressed. I was going to do this presentation on compression. I've got a good presentation on compression that I did a few years ago. I'd be happy to come back and do it again because it's a pretty amazing technology. I've been using it more and more all the time at a client, and I've run into a few gotchas to just buy the ways and be careful. So, all right, let's see. Let's do this one. Weekend handiwork. Asked to come troubleshoot really bad performance. Dug and dug some more. Asked the question of everybody, did you change anything this past weekend? Bruce Sims will remember this story. I asked the network team, I asked the system admins, I asked the applications folks, and anybody with a blue card, did you change anything this weekend? And of course, nobody knew nothing. That's Indiana speak, by the way. We dug some more, rinse and repeat. We did it again. We asked these same groups, did anybody do this? And I asked anybody with a yellow card. And yes, someone finally said, well, I did do this over the weekend. So Bruce and I look at each other and outside question, what is one of Art's favorite topics? Art, what's one of your favorite topics? I know that's unfair. RAID 5.
RAID 5 or update stats.
Yeah, RAID 5. We're doing RAID 5 this time. Yeah, RAID 5. You all know where I'm going with this. Can anyone gander a guess as to what happened over that weekend? Well, the sysadmin decided to move the disk from RAID 1 to RAID 5. And yes, it did have an impact. The funny part of this story is I told him how silly I thought it was. From that point in, I was never invited back, and Art is now doing their work. How ironic is that? But yeah, Bruce and I were pretty surprised. I hope Bruce remembers that, considering he's retired. So,
Paul and I gave him hell after that too. So
you did, but you probably did it better than I did. So
did.
Good.
And it didn't get us anywhere.
Oh no! Wow. But yeah, and quite honestly, I knew that was a problem right away because of all the work you had done and the white papers you had done on RAID 5. So yeah, that was kind of a fun shock. All right, here's another fun one. Actually, let me do this one first. Sometimes I need to restore a DB space that is bad, corrupt, whatever it might be, but it's not marked D or down. This is really pretty easy. I think a lot of people on the call might know how to do it, but some people don't, and I thought it's pretty easy to explain. Let me show you how it works. So you've got a DB space or any chunk in the DB space, it doesn't matter. You've got a DB space that you need to mark down so you can actually restore it from an archive. But again, it's not marked down. The first thing you do is corrupt the raw or cooked file space. I use DD, use an input file to at least 10K in size, override enough of the raw space, etc. That's a couple of examples of DDs, and it explains down here using dev0. Okay. Before I looked this up, I hadn't used dev0, so this works out well, generates a continuous stream of zeros, give it a block size of 1 meg, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. So there's all kinds of different things you can do here. You just got to make sure it's big enough to corrupt the chunk that you're pointing at. And when it says your new file name, this would be your chunk, your path to your chunk. Output files, that's same thing there. So that's okay. These are both output files. This would just be the path to the chunk as well. So, okay. So once you do that, set this environment variable, archive test, set it to be true. Use an onstat D to determine the chunk numbers that correspond to the DB space that you wish to mark down. Env minus little o followed by the chunk number for each chunk that is to be marked as down. In my travels, I found if I marked one chunk down, it would take the DB space with it. So don't know if that's always true, but in my case, it was. Env minus big O, you're probably more familiar with, to override down DB spaces, blocking the checkpoints. Answer yes to the message. This will render any DB spaces which have incurred blah, 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 blah. Do you wish to continue? Yes, I do. That chunk, that DB space should be down now. Double check. That's one thing I should have put in here. Look and see if the DB space is in fact marked D for down. Remember, on a character-based terminal, the difference between D and O is very subtle. That's an old joke from back in the day. And then on bar minus R followed by the DB space name and whatever else you need to do. So this is pretty handy. Again, I wanted to put it in the presentation and so you guys could see it. If anybody wants any of these tidbits, feel free to email me. I think they're going to post this, but if you want the hard version of it to be a little easier than pulling it off a slide, just let me know. Okay.
And this is all being recorded and will be presented on the IUG YouTube channel.
Yep.
Sometime.
I'm going to be a YouTube star. Oh, man. My life's complete. Anyway. All right. Let's see. Oh, this is one that won't take any time at all. I thought this was really fun the first time I bumped into it quite a few years ago. This is the opportunity to do a one-line restore and archive. And I'm not going to explain all of it because I want to get to some other topics, but essentially you're piping your on tape to another box. This additional profile was important for us for a couple of reasons, and you're using on tape on the other side. So this is the archive, right? This is the physical restore from standard IO. That's a one-liner. And again, you have to, in my case, I had to have a specific or a special profile to get around the not TTY message and that type of thing. But it's handy to have. That's all that's on this slide. I just thought it'd be handy to at least throw in here for people to use if they haven't.
That command and that command and that profile change is how I first met John Miller.
Is that right?
Yeah, our tape drives were down and I had to do a restore remotely from another system.
Yeah.
Couldn't get it to work.
Yep.
John walked me through that.
Yeah, it was really cool. I thought it was great when I first see this, and doing pipe to pipe movement of data. I think are two of the cooler things that we have, and it really comes down to just being redirects. And I shouldn't make it sound so simple, but yeah, I thought it was. I was really excited when I saw that. It was a few years ago when I first saw it. All right, let's see. Here's something I find handy. That was from Japan back in the day. Real quick slide on how to flush your buffer cache. I hope a lot of people know this by now. I have a feeling that not everybody does. It literally will zero or clear your buffer cache. Great for testing for all the obvious reasons. You create a procedure called whatever. You execute that procedure and you'll look in the message log and see flushed and removed all buffers from the buffer pool. So I use this a lot, like I say, just for testing. it used to be we would have to bounce the engine to clear the cache. This was really, really handy. I remember when John, as a matter of fact, called me and said, by the way, you've got a buffer zapper. I said, that's awesome. So that's come in really handy. Actually, you know what? I want to do this one first. We got a few more minutes. Small client called in a panic saying, a lot of my users can't connect even while a bunch are still able to connect. Looked at the user sessions. There were 50 user sessions and a bunch of Informix sessions. What was their issue? Those of you that have been around a while, you know it was what? They didn't have a net type at all, everybody connecting via shared memory. I joked with them that you haven't touched your own config since the install, have you? They didn't laugh. This was happening in 2005. When I got on their box and looked at their timestamp on their own config, guess what? 1996. They literally had installed, it was a real small environment. Back up a little bit. If you don't use net type to increase the number of shared memory connections allowed, our hard limit is 50. And so that's why when I saw 50 users, I knew exactly what it was. And it took all of 5 minutes to change it. The biggest reason I knew that is because I used to teach it all the time. So, but yeah, they hadn't touched their own config since 1996. So I've since touched their own config every once in a while. All right. This one I'd like to do, consulting at a client in Chicago. Very busy season for them, which is the fall. Engines up and working hard nearly 24/7 during this time. Every so many hours, performance goes south for about 4 hours. After that, it's just fine. I checked the scheduler, looked for road jobs, checked the cron tab. Update stats was scheduled to run exactly when this window hit. That's not always a problem. And in an environment like this, they had to run it at some point. The client said, we're following the recommendations published for years by Informix, by us. I said, okay, good. I said, let me see your script. Look closer at the script. They were doing something like this. Update stats medium for table XYZ, update stats high for this index column, et cetera. I think, that looks pretty good. Yeah, but not really. Looked a little closer, and you guys that are update stats guys know where I'm going with this. What would we like for them to do? They were doing medium against the whole table. And I can't remember if this is the number or not. I think it is. It samples only 2,743 rows for any given column. This second bullet is the problem. It replaces high distrib for all the columns in the table. So the just distributions you had for your really critical, in most cases, index columns, they're gone. We always recommend run medium against only those tables that don't require high. They were running high against single columns. It'll work, but it will make multiple passes of the table. Combine these all into one, allocate plenty of sort memory via PDQ and shemvert. The engine will decide how many passes it needs. If you get 3 passes and you have 3 columns, great. I'm sorry, 1 pass over 3 columns, that's great. If you don't have enough memory and you've combined all these, we may still have to do, say, 3 passes or so, but we'll figure that out. And the easy way to see that is through SQ Explain. I may not get to the slide that I am mention art, but by the way, this kind of stuff, one of my clients, I decided I wanted to write my own update stats thing, and it was fun. It was fun. It doesn't do anything close to what ARTS does. And there's another slide in here that I say, make your life simple, use do stats. So there's a plug for you, Art. And I know more than one client that live and breathe by do stats. And I'm thinking, why not? It works. You're updating it all the time. It's turned out to be the standard. So if any of you guys are really wrestling with update stats, get familiar with Art and his do stats and let it cut it loose. And you will definitely sleep much better. So, all right. Let me see. Did I do this one? No, I didn't. Okay, for some reason it was white. So, and probably the last big topic. In my travels, which I don't travel much anymore, but over the years, the topics areas I've had to whiteboard and explain the most. PDQ, yep, too many clients have compiled their store procedures with PDQ priority turned on. I actually even have a script that will go out and look at all the scripts that do update stats, looking for store procedure and PDQ priority in the same script. And It doesn't always work, but it at least gets me started. Most all of us have bumped into that. The client that I spend most of my time at now actually did this, and that's what made them shy about PDQ, unfortunately. Update stats and use of PDQ. This one client, they had index builds on a very big table. It took about 14 hours. After tuning update stats and using PDQ, much like I said in the previous slide, it ran in about 4 hours, and that's coincidental. That 4 hours is not the same 4 hours as the other slide, but again, do stats will do that for you. Update stats has been one of the hardest things to explain and understand over the years. I had one client that couldn't understand why performance was so bad. He said, because I'm running update stats. And I said, okay, can I see the script? And when he dropped me on his box, I looked at the size of the update stats script, and let's just say it was very small. You know what it said. I opened the file. It had one line. It said update statistics. That's it. So ironically, I gave them recommendations from one of our manuals, and they were put off because they said all you did was look it up and give what was written. And I said, well, that's what's needed. That's exactly what's needed. So anyway, update stats in PDQ can be tricky, easy to figure out with SQ Explain again, and other ways now too. Make your, there it is, Art, that's what I was talking about. Make your life easy, use Arts, do stats, and sleep better. All right, on bar. Again, one of the things that I've really gotten deep on over the years is on bar. I feel like I could whiteboard on bar to almost an internals, probably not that low, but with lots and lots of detail. So any of your big sites, on bar is going to be your thing. I think when PSM came out, I think it was really good. In my case, at one of my clients, we just got too much data. PSM is not going to work. So, and certainly on tape doesn't. So on bar, I've had to explain a lot. If you guys have any questions about on bar, things you're running into, feel free to email me. And the last one is what to do for best knee replacement recovery. This is a picture of my good knee and my bad knee. Now I've got two good knees, but yeah, I'm a wealth of knowledge on how to recover from knee replacements if you are really inclined. Well, we're going to get through most of these. Let's do two more and then we're done. That's good. One little handy script I wrote quite a while ago. Show me what chunks are free, relatively free, 53 pages or less being used. The 53 pages, if you're curious, when you allocate a brand new chunk, first 3 pages are reserve pages. One's the chunk free list page, 2 pages reserved for future use. They could be more than one chunk free list page, but initially there's 3 pages, plus 50 pages for the table space. So that's where the number of 53 comes up. So when you add a new chunk to an engine, if you look, you'll see if it's a brand new chunk in that DB. If it's a primary chunk in that DB space, you will definitely have a table space allocated there. You'll be missing 53 pages. We can create more table spaces if we need to as the DB space grows. But this tells me which are candidates for removal. Pay no attention to this. I cut out a bunch of stuff here, but it gives me a quick, by the way, you could pull 20 gig off, whatever it might be. And it gives me the candidates. The one thing is you're always safe. The engine won't let you drop a chunk if it's not empty. So that's a handy little thing. It's not ridiculous, but it's not bad to have. And the other one that I use occasionally is I use the defrag, the built-in defragger, the onstat, or the API call, not the onstat, to allow defragmentation or defragging, in this case, shrinking. A shrink operation, and this is a big topic, but I'll make it quick. Shrink operations is one, there's shrink, repack, and some others. Okay, shrink will return unused pages to the DB space. And I'll run this occasionally, usually during maintenance windows, where I'll go ahead and say, give me a range from 38 stents to 999. It goes through and literally works through the partitions by part num, as you see. Let me see, there it is right there. I kick off fragment shrink. This is the fragment number, starting to defrag, etc. You can kind of see it up here. The delta right now is 0. The delta here is minus 29, and eventually lots of lines here. I've actually cleaned out 454 stents from the table, 454 pages from the pages that no, I take that back. That's the total number of stents from these partitions within this given DB space, or in this case, it's a database. You'll see this kind of thing occasionally. I'm sorry. You'll see this kind of thing occasionally where it failed to defrag. That's okay. That literally means we didn't have enough, for you COBOL guys, enough working storage in that DB space to be able to do the fragment, or the shrink, I mean, to be able to move stuff around. And that doesn't bother me. So I expect the larger partitions to fail. If I have to defrag a very large partition, I end up throwing some storage space chunks at that DB space. Another nice reason to have storage provisioning or a storage pool, because it's really quick and easy to add chunks to that DB space. So this I use occasionally just to keep things clean. What I've noticed with repack, shrink, and compress, documentation has always said that it's not going to have much impact because it's doing it in really small chunks and small pieces. And let's not say chunks. I definitely see impact if I run it during a busy time and see transactions failing and that type of thing. Not to a horrible extent, but this is the type of thing I typically only want to run during a maintenance window. And you really have to pick and choose which ones you want to run, because some of these defragment or shrink operations can take a long time. So, all right. I cannot believe we got through everything. I bet I talked really, really fast. It's so different not having a whiteboard to be able to go to. But anyway, that is the talk. Anybody want to ask questions? Jump in.
Or the chat. Remember, this is recorded.
Let me get your last slide up here, John. There it is.
Yeah, there you go. You leave that one up for a bit.
Yeah.
Just to get some people.
So any comments or questions, feel free to jump in, whoever wants to. Send me email at mark@markscranton.com if you have questions. I'm always curious what the crowds are seeing out there and what the clients are wrestling with. And thanks to you guys that jumped in to help. It's always a pleasure. Anyone?
I don't see any chatting.
Wow. Yeah, I must have covered everything really clear, which I doubt. You mean people like Jeff Philippi don't have a question of any sort?
Well, speaking of Philippi, he is on for next month.
Well, I know, but there's even Mike Walker. I want to hear Mike Walker's. And Mariano, I haven't seen you in forever. Good to see some of these names. That must be Rhonda. Oh, her name escapes me. But anyway, okay. Well, that's the presentation. I would love to do another one at some point that's a real deep dive into the other one I thought about doing this time was compression, and really doing screenshots and proofs and things that you've seen before of compression and repack, shrink, some of the different operations. So if I get a chance, I'll do something deep like that if I could. So
make it a plan.
Yep. Back to you, John.
Jeff Philippi is up next month. I don't have the exact date, but it's on IDS.org. Once this recording gets posted to YouTube, we have a YouTube star in our hands. Anyway, thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.